Some railroads were built to carry people farther. Others were built out of bone, blood, screams, and names that were never written down. I used to think I understood sound. I record location audio for documentary films. My job is to go where most people only look with their eyes and capture what they usually miss. Wind slipping through stone, water dripping under rotten wood, metal flexing in the dark. The breath of room seems to keep long after everyone has left it. I had been inside abandoned hospitals, sealed mines, ghost towns in the desert, and houses that groaned like living things after sunset. I had heard plenty of strange sounds, but I could always explain them. Wind, temperature, old structures, animals, fatigue. I had never believed a place could speak for itself. Not until Kanchanaburi. Not until I stood alone near an old section of the Death Railway. Sometime close to midnight, with the Thai jungle pressing in around me and my recorder still running. There were no trains, no tourists, no workers, nothing that could have made the sound of iron striking stone. And yet, from beneath the ground, I heard a hammer. Slow, heavy, patient. As if somewhere below the earth, hands that should have turned to dust were still working. Then, between the hammer blows, a voice spoke my family name. Not loudly, not from far away. It sounded as if it were standing right beside my ear. Carter. Count again. My name is Daniel Carter. The trip to Thailand began as a routine assignment. Our production team was developing a documentary series about historic places marked by tragedy. Each episode would be built not only through interviews and archival images, but through real field recordings, the actual sound of the place itself. Death Railway was one of the most important locations on our list. During World War II, the railway was built to connect Thailand and Burma, now Myanmar, through mountains, rivers, jungle, and brutal terrain. The Japanese military forced Allied prisoners of war and a vast number of Asian civilian laborers to build it under starvation, disease, exhaustion, monsoon rain, and violence. More than 100,000 people died during its construction. That number is so large that when you read it on a screen, it almost stops feeling real. But when you stand in the war cemetery at Kanchanaburi, when you see rows of white grave markers under a humid gray sky, when you read names of men who were 21, 23, 25 years old, and then you find stones marked only with known unto God, the number is no longer history. It becomes weight. I arrived in Kanchanaburi 3 days before the main crew. My assignment was simple: scout the sound environment, record clean ambience, identify places where the landscape itself could carry the story. The man who met me at the station was named Somchai. He was in his early 60s, thin, sun-darkened, with deep-set eyes and a careful way of speaking. He had once taught history. Later, he became a guide for researchers, veterans' families, and documentary crews who came to the Death Railway looking for something more than a tourist photograph. From the moment we shook hands, I had the feeling that Somchai did not know this place only from books. He knew it the way a person knows a scar. When I told him I had come to record the Death Railway, he was quiet for a few seconds. Then he asked, "Do you want to record the sound of the train, or the sound of what remains after the train has passed?" I thought it was a poetic line guides used for foreign visitors. I said, "Both if I can." Somchai studied me for a long moment. Then he said, "Here, some sounds should not be called back too often. I smiled politely. At the time, I had no idea what he meant. On the first day, Samchai took me to the Kanchanaburi War Cemetery. The weather had turned dim after rain. The grass was bright green. The white headstones stood in clean rows, and a heavy layer of moisture hung in the air. Somewhere beyond the cemetery wall, I could hear motorcycles passing, children leaving school, a bird calling from a tree. It was peaceful in a way that almost felt wrong. I placed a microphone close to the ground, pointed it toward the rows of graves, and pressed record. Through my headphones, the wind became intimate. It moved across the grass, brushed the stone, and passed on. It was thin, soft, and not frightening. But the longer I listened, the more it stopped sounding like wind. It sounded like someone exhaling. Samchai stood a few steps away. He did not speak while I worked. Only after I removed my headphones did he ask, "Did you hear anything?" "Just wind," I said. He nodded. "On the first day, it is usually only wind." I looked at him. "You say that like the next days bring something else." Samchai did not answer directly. He looked out over the headstones and said, "Many people here have names, but along the railway, many people died without one being written down. Allied prisoners are remembered more often because they had records, numbers, families searching for them. The Asian laborers, many simply vanished." He paused. "Without a name, it is difficult to rest." I did not know what to say to that. That evening, back at my guest house by the river, I listened through the cemetery recording. It was a habit I never skipped. Every day in the field, I reviewed my audio, marked usable ambience, cut out noise, and logged anything unusual. The cemetery file was 18 minutes long. The first 12 minutes were normal. Wind, birds, a tourist coughing in the distance, a motorbike outside the wall. Then, at the 13th minute, a sound appeared. I froze. I rewound the file. It sounded like metal striking rock. A second blow followed. Then a third. 3 strikes, almost exactly 2 seconds apart. I raised the volume. Beneath the wind, there were more. Not 3, many. They were buried deep in the recording, almost outside the range of the microphone, as if they came from somewhere farther than distance itself. I wrote in my field notebook, metallic tapping, unknown source, ask Samchai. Then I closed the laptop. I was not afraid yet. I was curious. And curiosity is what pulled me farther than I should have gone. The next day, we rode the train along one of the sections of track still in use. The train left Kanchanaburi slowly, passing small houses, fields, trees, and then the edge of rougher country. Tourists leaned toward the windows with their phones out as the cars followed the old line near the river and the cliffs. I placed a microphone beside an open window. The wheels clicked over the rails in a steady rhythm. On some stretches, it sounded like a heartbeat. On others, it sounded like counting. Samchai sat across from me, watching the jungle slide by. He seemed quieter than he had been the day before. I asked him about the hammering in the cemetery file. He did not turn immediately. After a while, he asked, "What minute did you hear it?" I felt a chill before I knew why. Around minute 13. His hand tightened on his knee. How many strikes? I didn't count. It sounded like many. Next time, he said, do not count alone. The words hung between us. I thought he might be joking, but his face had no humor in it. Is there a local story about hammering? I asked. Samchai looked toward the rails. Not a story. Many people hear it. Some at Hellfire Pass. Some near the bridge. Some in riverside hotels on nights after heavy rain. They say it is the sound of men forced to work after dark. He let that sit for a moment. But the hammering is not the worst part. What is? The silence after it stops. I frowned. Samchai continued, when the hammering stops, it means they are waiting for someone to answer. That afternoon, Samchai took me to Hellfire Pass. The moment I stepped into the cutting, I understood the name. By day, Hellfire Pass is beautiful in a way that feels almost punishing. Jungle growth covers the top of the cutting. Roots grip the stone. Thin pieces of light fall between the high rock walls. The path runs through the mountain like a wound that never fully closed. I placed my palm against the damp stone. It was hard to imagine that this place had once echoed with hammers, drills, shouted orders, fever coughing, and bodies collapsing in mud. It was hard to imagine men so exhausted they could barely stand being forced to work under torchlight in the rain, their shadows moving against the rock like figures in hell. Samchai said, survivors remembered the night work here. From far away, the cutting glowed with fire, and the men looked as if they were working inside the underworld. I switched on the recorder. This time I wanted a long take. The sound of the jungle at Hellfire Pass was dense. Insects, leaves, water dripping from rock, birds hidden in the canopy. But beneath all of it, through my headphones, I could sense a low vibration. It was very faint, very far away, like a tremor under the earth. I removed the headphones. The vibration vanished. I put them back on. It returned. I checked the cable, changed the microphone angle, adjusted the recording level, and listened again. No technical fault. The sound was there only when the microphone translated the place into my ears. While I was crouched near the backup recorder, something slipped from the pocket of my field jacket and fell onto the stone path. It was an old photograph. I had brought it from home and almost forgotten it was there. The picture showed a young soldier standing beside a train somewhere in Southeast Asia. The corners were cracked. The paper had gone yellow. On the back, in faded handwriting, were the words, HC 1943. Don't let him count. HC was Henry Carter. My grandfather. My family rarely spoke about him. All I knew was that he had served during the war, gone missing for a period, and eventually returned as a different man. He died before I was born. My grandmother kept the photograph in a small wooden box with several letters no one was allowed to read. After she died, my mother found the box. I took the photograph with me for the trip, not because I thought it had anything to do with the death railway, but because it felt appropriate. A personal fragment of wartime memory in a project built around memory. Samchai saw the photograph. His expression changed immediately. May I see it? He asked. I handed it to him. Samchai held the photograph with both hands. He studied the soldier's face, then turned the photo over and read the words on the back. Carter, he said quietly. Do you know that name? He did not answer right away. He gave the photograph back to me. Tonight, he said, you should not stay near the railway. Why? Because some names make the hammering louder when they return. For the first time, my curiosity was replaced by a cold line of fear down my spine. "Samchai, what do you know about Henry Carter?" He looked down the cutting, where the path disappeared into shadow. "Not enough to be certain," he said, "but enough to tell you to leave before dark." That evening, Samchai came to my guest house with an old paper envelope. Inside were photocopies of faded wartime documents. He said an Australian researcher had given copies to his father years earlier while investigating records of prisoners and laborers who died along the railway. On one typed list, the names were uneven and blurred. Some lines were crossed out. Some had only numbers. Near the bottom, one name pulled the air out of my chest. Carter Henry, transferred/status unclear. I read it again and again. "Where did this come from?" I asked. "My father kept many copies," Samchai said. "After the war, he worked near sections of the old line. When heavy rain caused earth to slide, the forest sometimes returned bones, metal, buttons, pieces of shoes. My father helped collect them and report them to officials or memorial groups." Samchai looked at the photograph on the table. Once, he found part of a broken metal tag. It had the word Carter on it. My throat went dry. A dog tag? Perhaps. He did not keep it. Years later, an elderly woman came to Kanchanaburi. She traveled with her daughter. She asked about the name Henry Carter. My father gave her the metal piece. I did not need to ask who it was. My grandmother. My mother. They had been here. No one in my family had ever told me. I called my mother that night. When I mentioned Kanchanaburi and Henry Carter, she went quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "Your grandmother did go there. I was young, but I remember the trip. She cried all night after we came back to the hotel." "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Because she didn't want us to. She said some things, if told wrong, keep the dead from resting." I looked at the writing on the back of the photograph. "Don't let him count." Did she ever explain that line? I asked. The part about counting? My mother hesitated. Before she died, she mentioned it. She held my hand and said, "If Daniel ever goes to that railway, don't let him count for Henry." I did not understand. "What does that mean?" "I don't know," my mother said, but she was terrified of the Carter name going back there. I looked at Samchai. He had heard enough through the speaker to understand. When I ended the call, he said, "Can you leave Kanchanaburi tomorrow?" I shook my head. "No, I need to know what happened." Samchai sighed. "The dead do not always pull the living down because they hate them. Sometimes they pull because they need the living to do what they can no longer do." "What if they need me?" I asked. He held my eyes. "Are you sure you want to know what for?" The next night, I went back toward Hellfire Pass. Not to the main memorial path, but to a less visited section deeper in the jungle. Samchai said it had once been part of a work area near the old line. With us was Molly, his niece, a young archaeology student from Bangkok. She carried flashlights, water, a first aid kit, a map, and a small wreath wrapped in plastic. Before we entered the jungle, Samchai put a hand on my shoulder. "We are not hunting ghosts," he said. "We are not calling names to test our courage. You may record, but you must respect this place. If I say stop, you stop. If I say leave, you leave." I nodded. We walked through wet forest after rain. The ground was soft and slick. The air smelled of leaves, mud, and old water. Far off, insects screamed in layers. Now and then, our flashlights passed over black wet stones, bent trees, and raised strips of earth that looked like the ghost of a road being swallowed by the jungle. Around 8 o'clock, we reached the cutting. It was narrower and lower than Hellfire Pass, with no rail left, only stone, mud, and scattered pieces of rotten timber. If Samchai had not brought me there, I would never have guessed it had once been connected to the railway at all. Molly placed the wreath on a rock. Samchai pressed his hands together and murmured a prayer in Thai. I set 3 recorders, one facing the cutting, one low to the ground, and one hanging from a tree branch for wide ambience. Then I put on my headphones. First, everything was normal. Insects, dripping water, Molly's rain jacket rustling, Samchai breathing slowly beside me. At 8:13 p.m., the insects stopped. Not gradually. Not drowned out by wind. They simply cut off. The entire jungle fell into a silence so deep that I could hear blood moving in my ears. Then the hammer struck. I froze. The sound came from inside the cutting. There was no one there. Molly aimed her flashlight between the stone walls. The beam crossed wet rock, weeds, mud, and tree roots that curled like fingers. Empty. But the hammering continued. I removed my headphones. The sound remained. It was in the air now, nearer, heavier. Samchai raised one hand, warning me not to speak. Beneath the hammering, another sound began to surface. A cough. A groan. Someone breathing hard. A man's voice, weak and dry, whispered in English, "Water." Molly covered her mouth. Samchai closed his eyes, as if he had heard the sound too many times in his life. The hammering grew faster. I stared into the cutting. For a moment, the darkness was no longer darkness. I saw firelight. Not with my eyes exactly. It was more like an image pressed directly into my mind. Torches burning in rain. Thin men swinging hammers. Bent backs, bare feet in mud, a body falling. No one stopping. No one allowed to stop. I stepped back. My heel struck something in the mud. I looked down and aimed my flashlight. A small piece of metal was half buried in the wet ground. Samchai saw me reach for it. "Do not touch it," he said sharply. But my fingers were already on it. The moment I touched the metal, the hammering stopped. Absolute silence. I pulled the object free. It was half of a rusted military dog tag. Most of the letters had been eaten away, but under the shaking flashlight beam, I could still make out part of a name. Cart, I could not breathe. Then a voice spoke from the cutting. "Carter." Samchai gripped my arm. "Do not answer." The voice came again. Not loud. Not angry. But very close. "Carter, count. Count." I looked down at the dog tag. A strange pressure filled my head. I did not want to speak. I knew I should not speak. But my throat opened as if someone else had reached inside me and taken my voice. "1." A hammer answered from the darkness. I heard myself continue. 2. 3. Samchai squeezed my arm until it hurt. Daniel, stop. But I could not stop. 4. 5. 6. Molly started crying. Uncle Samchai, do something. Samchai began chanting in Thai, fast and low. His voice trembled, but mine kept going. 7. Clack. 8. Clack. 9. Clack. My mouth went dry. My tongue felt heavy as stone. 10. 11. 12. After 12, everything stopped. I stood in the jungle with the cold dog tag in my hand, afraid to breathe. Samchai pulled me back. Do not say the next number, he whispered. From the cutting, the voice returned. Where is 13? At that exact moment, a scream came from the forest to our right. Help! All 3 of us turned. The scream came again. Please, help me. It was a living voice. Not an echo, not in my head. Molly ran toward it. Samchai cursed under his breath and followed. I shoved the broken tag into my pocket, grabbed a small recorder, and went after them. We found a tourist trapped in a collapsed drainage cut. He had wandered off the trail to take photographs after the rain. A fallen branch had pinned his leg, and he had been stuck since late afternoon. His phone had no signal. His flashlight was almost dead. He was shaking when we pulled him free. Someone led you here, didn't they? He said. I asked, who? He pointed back toward the cutting. A man, thin, very thin. He stood above the ditch and looked down at me. I thought I was hallucinating. He said, what did he say? The tourist swallowed hard. Tell Carter the 13th has no number. The rescue team arrived close to midnight. The tourist was taken to a hospital. He survived. But none of us felt relief. On the drive back, Samchai did not speak. Molly sat in the back seat with both arms around her backpack. I sat by the window with the broken dog tag in my pocket, feeling it like a piece of ice against my chest. Back at the guest house, I opened the laptop and checked the recordings. I needed to know what had actually been captured. The file began normally. Jungle ambience, footsteps, Molly placing the wreath, Samchai's prayer. Then, at exactly 8:13 p.m., the insects cut out. The hammering began. I skipped ahead to the moment I found the tag. After the wet sound of metal being pulled from mud, there was a sound I had not heard at the scene. Someone crying. Not loudly. A small, restrained sound, as if the person had been crying for years and had no strength left. Then the voice spoke. Carter, count. After that came my own voice. I listened to myself count from 1 to 12. Every number answered by one hammer strike. After 12, there was a long silence. My hand shook on the trackpad. Then a second voice came through the recording. Not the same one that had called Carter. This one was lower, farther away, and rougher, as if it rose from under the ground. No number. I took off the headphones. The room was quiet. The air conditioner hummed. Somewhere outside, a motorbike passed along the road. Kanchanaburi at night sounded peaceful again. But I knew something had followed me back. I placed Henry Carter's photograph beside the broken tag. The writing on the back, "Don't let him count," had changed its meaning. Do not let him count. Not because counting would wake the dead. Because Henry Carter had once counted wrong. I called my mother. When I told her about the dog tag, the hammering, and the phrase "the 13th has no number," she went quiet for a long time. Then she told me to wait. I could hear her opening drawers, moving boxes, turning over old envelopes. At last, she came back with a shaking voice. "There is a letter your grandmother kept. She never let anyone read it. I read part of it once when I was a child, but I didn't understand it. I think you need to hear it now." She unfolded the paper, crackled over the phone. "Eleanor," she read, "I do not know if I have the right to write to you. There are nights when I still hear the hammers. Not outside, but under the floor. I told them 12. I wrote 12, but there were 13 under that stretch of rail." My mother stopped, her breath catching. Then she continued. "The last one had no prisoner number, no name on the list, no one asking after him. They told me to record only the men with numbers. They told me the ones without numbers did not count. I did as I was told. I lived. But since that night, the hammers have not stopped." My mother began to cry. I closed my eyes. The jungle came back to me. The hammering, the counting, the voice asking where the 13th was. Henry Carter had not been haunted by a ghost seeking revenge. He had been haunted by a person erased from the count. Someone whose death had been denied even the dignity of a number. The next morning, I brought the letter, the photograph, and the broken dog tag to Samchai. Molly was there as well. She had gathered photocopies of old notes and records from her grandfather's files and from contacts in Bangkok. One handwritten note referred to a small collapse near a secondary cutting in 1943. 12 prisoners were listed as dead or missing. In the margin, barely visible, someone had written, +1 native laborer, no number. +1. No name. No age. No hometown. No confirmed nationality. No one searching. Molly said, many Asian laborers were poorly recorded. Some were grouped by work camp. Some were marked only by origin. Some were not recorded at all. If a person had no number, it was easy for him to disappear from the official list. I stared at the little note in the margin. +sign. A number. A man. All his life after the war, Henry Carter had been followed by hammering not because he murdered someone, but because he allowed the record to remain wrong. Maybe he was starving. Maybe he was terrified. Maybe a guard was standing over him. Maybe he believed he could correct it later. Maybe all he wanted was to survive one more day. But history is often bent by moments like that. One person is left off a list. One death is not counted. One hammer keeps sounding beneath the rails. Samchai said, "The dead do not always need us to understand everything. Sometimes they only need us to admit they were there." "How do you admit that for someone with no name?" I asked. Samchai looked at me. "By not pretending his namelessness makes him smaller than the ones whose names survived." That afternoon, we returned to the secondary cutting. This time, I did not bring my full sound kit as if I were hunting evidence. I carried only one small recorder, Henry Carter's photograph, a copy of the letter, and the wreath Molly had prepared. The sky was gray. The forest was wet. There was no rain. We stood where the hammering had sounded the night before. Samchai bowed his head and prayed in Thai. Molly placed the wreath on the rock. I turned on the recorder not to gather proof, but to preserve an apology. I spoke slowly. Henry Carter wrote 12. Wind moved through the cutting. But there were 13. I looked down at the earth. The 13th had no number. We have not found his name, but he was here. He worked here. He suffered here. He died here. My throat tightened. He is counted. The forest stayed quiet. No hammering. No voice. No figure at the end of the cutting. Only wind, wet stone, and the smell of leaves returning to soil. I thought it was over. But just as I reached to stop the recorder, a sound came softly from below the ground. One strike. Very light. Not like a hammer hitting stone. More like a hammer being set down after a shift that had lasted far too long. Molly began to cry. Samchai bowed lower. I stood perfectly still. Because in that moment, I felt we were not listening to only one person. We were listening to many. The ones with no numbers. No graves. No family who could travel across the world to search for them. No line in a documentary. No name in a history book. They did not scream. They did not drag me into the earth. They only seemed to stand somewhere beyond the trees, behind the stone, beneath the vanished rails, waiting to see whether the living would leave them out again. I left Kanchanaburi the next day. On the train back toward Bangkok, I sat by the window. The cars moved slowly over old track, past jungle, river, and places where tourists lifted cameras without knowing how many people had fallen beneath the beauty in front of them. I listened again to the final recording. My voice saying, "He is counted." Wind. A pause. Then the soft hammer strike. I was about to stop the file when, in the final second, I heard something else. A voice. Not English. Not Thai I could understand. Maybe the language of a laborer from a place history had passed over too quickly. I did not understand the words, but I understood the feeling in them. It was not rage. It was not begging. It was exhaustion and relief. I kept the file. But when the documentary was finished, I did not include the full recording. I used only a short piece. Wind at Hellfire Pass. Silence. One hammer strike. After it, the screen did not show a ghost, a shadow, or any horror effect. It showed one line of text, for those whose names were never recorded. I thought the story ended there. But on my last night before leaving Thailand, I looked again at the photograph of Henry Carter. The old writing on the back remained, HC, 1943, don't let him count. Beneath it, where the paper had always been blank, a second line had appeared. I am certain it had not been there before. The words were faint, as if pressed up from inside the paper itself. He counted 12 because he was told only 12 mattered. I sat with that sentence for a long time. And for the first time, I understood that the most terrifying thing about the death railway was not the screaming at night. Not the hammering beneath the stone. Not the thin figures standing at the end of the cutting. The most terrifying thing was how easily a human being could be erased from history because he had no number, no papers, and did not belong to the group the world was prepared to remember. A man can die twice, once under the rail, and once in the record. I brought the photograph home. Months after the documentary was released, I received an email from a viewer. He wrote that one of his ancestors had been a forced laborer on the railway. No one in his family knew exactly where the man had died. No one knew whether he had a grave. No one knew whether his name had ever been written anywhere. At the end of the email, he wrote only one sentence. "Thank you for letting the hammer sound once." I read that line for a long time. Then I opened the recording again. This time, the hammer did not frighten me the way it once had. Still hurt. It was still cold. It still brought me back to wet stone, black jungle, and that question in the dark. Where's 13? But I no longer thought of it as only a haunting. It was a reminder. History is not made only by the names carved into stone. It is also made by those who had no stone, no photograph, no record, and no one left to speak for them. If you ever go to Kanchanaburi, if you cross the bridge near the River Kwai, ride the slow train toward Nam Tok, or walk between the rock walls of Hellfire Pass, go slowly. Do not only take pictures. Do not listen to a few numbers and move on. Do not treat the place like a haunted attraction. Listen. You may hear only wind. You may hear the train grinding over the rails. You may hear insects in the wet forest. But if, for one moment, every sound around you suddenly stops, and from beneath the stone you hear a hammer, then another clack, do not run right away. Stand still. Lower your head, because it may not be a spirit trying to harm you. It may only be someone who has waited a very long time to be counted as having existed. And if, from the dark, you hear someone ask, "Where is the 13th?" remember that the answer is not simply finding one lost name. The answer is admitting how many names were lost. On the death railway, the dead do not always want revenge. Sometimes they only need the living to count again. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for more true location horror stories rooted in real places, real history, and the voices that still seem to echo after dark. And if you ever visit a place marked by tragedy, remember this. Sometimes the most frightening sound is not a scream. Sometimes it is a single hammer strike reminding us that someone was left out.